Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X research and professional physicist, and today I'd like to bring to you another one of my articles. This one is entitled Sun Simulating Devices, the Irrefutable Evidence. The evidence showing that Sun and Moon simulators are being used in the Earth's atmosphere and from orbit is now irrefutable. However, there are those who deny it, and furthermore, many people have not had a chance to look at this evidence. So I detail it in this article one more time. And I start with this photograph of diverging light beams coming through holes in clouds. Now, if these light beams had originated with the real sun, they would all be parallel to each other because the light source in the case of the real sun is at infinity. And that means that by the time the light reaches Earth, the light rays are all parallel to each other. So that means that these should all be at the same angle, but they are not. Instead, they are at different angles, and if we follow them, we trace them backwards using these dashed lines, we see that they intersect at a position which is approximately, we can estimate it to be just above the clouds. Well, we don't need to approximate, we know it's just above the clouds. And this is therefore where the source of light is. And that source of light cannot be the sun, because that means that the source of light is within the atmosphere. You can also see that it's very orangey here, whilst the light source here is white. So it cannot be the same light source illuminating the Earth's atmosphere at the horizon. It cannot be the same as this one. This, as you can see, is producing white light. So there are multiple sources already just from this photograph, and in addition, the fact that these light beams diverge means the light source, the simulator, the device simulating the sun, is right above the clouds. And here we see a photograph of a device within the clouds. It's hexagonal in shape, and it seems to be an array of mirrors or light sources that are hexagonal as well. And there seems to be a hole there in the center. This is obviously a device, and a device with mirrors and possibly lamps has to be a device that simulates a natural light source, and therefore to do with the sun simulation that is occurring in Earth's atmosphere. So we here have another device, because this looks like it is the sun in the clouds. But we know that the real sun cannot be in the clouds. And yet this light source, which looks like the sun, has clouds in front of it and clouds behind it. So it must be a sun simulator operating at cloud altitude and therefore in the Earth's atmosphere. And here we see some still shots of the sunrise. This comes from a video by Pies and Cakes, and what we can see is a yellow light source, and we see another light source here. So there are two, and the yellow one is likely to be the sun, because as we know, the sun is yellow. This one is white, perhaps edged by some pink here, and it comes up and in front of the other light source. So the brighter one is actually the sun simulator. The sun simulator would be nearer the Earth than the real sun, which is why it goes in front of it. So this is therefore the sun simulator. As you can see, it produces this lens flare that we associate with the sun simulators. So that seems to be a sun simulator. So we have the real sun, which is actually quite dim and yellow. This shows that it has weakened, and I've written a lot about that. And we have a sun simulator, clear evidence. And this is detailed in article 217. Two sources in the sky indicate a very weak sun. And again, we have another photograph of the object in the sky that is very bright and obviously simulating the sun, but it cannot be the sun because it has a hexagonal symmetry. It has 6 sides. It has 6 double or triple beams of light grouped together, again showing a hexagonal symmetry. So this, it cannot possibly be the sun. The sun cannot look like this. The sun is a sphere. The sun does not have beams of light emanating from it. And furthermore, we see clearly these devices around it that look like arrays with holes in them, and this edge around it, which is clearly what we would expect from a device. So again, this is the sun simulator, and here we have a photograph from a satellite. So this is from the view of the satellite, and what we see is a light source, and we see its reflection on the Earth. Now the Earth is 70% oceans. The oceans are very reflective, so we can see reflections of light sources in these oceans, and this is from the perspective of the satellite. But the problem is that this reflection of this light source is way too large to be the sun. The estimated diameter of this reflection on the Earth is about 1/10 of the Earth's diameter, which is 791 miles or 1,274 kilometers. And this is actually it could actually be slightly larger than that, but it is a conservative estimate, I think, for this reflection to be about 700, nearly 800 miles in diameter. But the real sun, and I calculated this in article 224 entitled Sun Simulated in Orbit, Irrefutable Evidence. The real sun from the satellite's perspective cannot have a diameter any greater than 37 miles or 59 kilometers. So that means that this reflection is 21 times larger than what we would expect if this was the real sun. And that shows that this reflection is not of the real sun. So if it's not of the real sun, what is it of? Obviously, it has to be an object which is simulating the sun. As you can see, it emits white light. There seems to be some pink light emission from around the white. And you can see that the reflection is also edged by the sort of pink light. So this is not the real sun. Obviously cannot be the real sun. This light source has to be much, much smaller than the sun because it has to be a device. So it's much smaller than the Earth, and therefore must be much closer to the Earth than the real sun is. And then it produces a reflection of this size without, well, we can actually estimate where it is, what its altitude is, because it's likely that a simulated orbit would simulate the sun and thus move at a speed which would be twice the orbital speed of the Earth. And that means it would have a period of 12 hours, and that means that its orbital altitude would be about 12,500 miles above the surface of the Earth. Now, more evidence, more irrefutable evidence. Each of these is irrefutable and shows that a sun simulator is being used. But this one is about the UVC radiation that reaches the surface of the Earth. And this was measured in 2002 by some researchers, here represented by the word Diffie. And we can see this line that is plotted here showing what these measurements were, and what we see is the UVA here. This is the UVA range, and then we see some UVB, but it goes sharply downwards to 0 before we even reach the top of the UVB range. As we increasing in energy as we moving this way or along the negative x-axis here. So this this is the UVC range. UVC is the most energetic of the UV light that we are supposed to be getting from the sun. But we're not supposed to be getting any UVC at the Earth's surface because the Earth has a layer called the ozone layer, which absorbs most of the UVC radiation. Should be getting more than 1 or 2% of what reaches the top of the atmosphere. But when it was measured in 2017 and 2018, and this was what was measured, the same amount of UVA, the same amount of UVB, but when you get to the bottom or to the top range of the UVB, it doesn't go straight down as it did in 2002. It becomes flat, and then we see there's UVC here reaching the surface, and then the trend goes straight up, which means a lot more UVC radiation is reaching at the surface in the top range of UVC radiation than at the lower range here. And then on top of that, if we compare it with the UV radiation that has been measured by NASA to reach the top of the atmosphere, and we see here the UVA just slightly higher than what's been measured, showing that some of the UVA is being absorbed. The UVB that reaches the top of the atmosphere is quite a lot higher than what is measured at the surface, showing that quite a lot of it is being absorbed. This range of UVC as well, we can see some absorption. But then as we move to the more energetic end of the UVC radiation, we see that more of this UVC radiation is measured at the surface than reaches the atmosphere. How is that even possible? Well, that is possible only if there is, it shows that there has to be a source of UVC radiation within the atmosphere. It's obvious. Now, what kind of light source would emit UVC radiation? It can only be a powerful light source, and that would, of course, be the sun simulators, which we have seen are operating within the Earth's atmosphere. And we also see that the trend here is to sharply increase. And this suggests that these devices may actually, probably are, emitting extreme ultraviolet, even more energetic than UVC radiation, is most likely reaching the surface of the Earth because these objects are emitting it. This is, of course, very harmful for living organisms. Now, one of the reasons why sun simulators are being used is that the sun goes dark periodically. The sun goes completely dark during the so-called STO eclipse season and has been doing so since 2011. This fact has been covered up with the suggestion that the darkness seen progressing across the face of the sun is due to an eclipse. But the fact that the corona shrinks back at the same time cannot be due to an eclipse. So what it shows is that the sun actually is going dark. So let me explain this once more, because there are a lot of people out there, and some people call them trolls, that find it difficult to understand this. But if we have the Earth here, and the Earth is advancing in front of the sun with respect, or from the perspective of the STO satellite, then at this point where the darkness on the sun has reached this point on the sun, they would expect the Earth to be somewhere below this blue line. Okay, so the Earth is here. The Earth would be covering everything in the sun below this blue line. Okay, so the Earth would be here and covering this part of the sun. But then the Earth cannot be covering this part of the sun, the corona. how can the Earth cover that part of the corona? It's there and it's not there. And this shows that the corona is shrinking back. It cannot be explained by an eclipse, but only by the fact that the sun is going progressively darker as it interacts with some object that must come very close to it. And as you can see, that corona there is not there. It should be there because it's here, and the Earth cannot cover that part of the corona if the Earth is behind the blue line. And we see some more images here. This is from August 16, 2017. This is the first day of one of the last eclipse seasons, or so-called eclipse seasons. As I said, cannot be to an eclipse. And you can see the Earth would have to be here. It would have to be at a totally different angle as well, because the angle at which the Earth was progressing across the surface of the Earth was at this angle, and now the angle is sharper, greater than 50 degrees to the horizontal here, and here it was perhaps 40 degrees with respect to the horizontal. So the Earth would have to jump around in order for this to occur. And again, we see that if the Earth is here and is covering this portion of the sun in order for the edge of the darkness to be along here, then again we have corona missing here. The Earth cannot cover this part of the corona, and yet it's not there. And it shows that the corona shrinks. It shrinks back, and this can only be explained by the fact that the sun is going dark. Now, it happens at other times. It happened on April 11th. This is from April 11th, and we can see here the jagged edge of this outline. These cutoff lines are used to cover up something on the sun, and I think it is both the fact that it's going dark and the objects that are causing it to go dark. And we can see this jagged edge here. It's not a smooth straight line, so it's not a cutoff line. This is the type of edge that we see around coronal holes, but yet there's no coronal hole there, and this image is just from a few minutes before this one. There was no coronal hole there. This shows that the sun had gone dark in that region, and so this whole region here of the sun had gone dark. And on April 18th, again, we see these cutoff lines being used. As you can see, this jagged edge as we'd expect to see around the coronal hole, but there's no coronal hole there. So this shows that the sun's going dark, and the cutoff lines are moved downwards. This edge on either side still shows that the sun is going dark. Possibly this whole section here is going dark. And it moves further down. Again, there are no coronal holes there. No coronal hole here to give rise to this type of edge that we see here. And again, here, there's no coronal hole there. If we compare it, there's no coronal hole there. So there's no reason to have this kind of edge or outline or interface between light and darkness here. And this is therefore the sun going dark, and the fact that these cutoff lines are moved further and further down until we get an image where the sun is completely gone shows us that the sun actually went dark on that day as well. And this one is from April 11th again, and again we see that the sun had gone dark in this section here in this 193 angstrom image. And this is a visible light image from the same time. You see the same sort of shape of the sun, indicating that the sun had gone dark in this section. And this shows that it goes dark at all wavelengths, including visible light. So this is the visible light image, 4,500 angstrom of visible light. So that means the sun goes dark in visible light as well. Now, if the sun goes dark, Obviously, we do not see it, and this is the reason why sun simulators are being used or operating on the Earth. And this is so that the Earth's population does not realize that the sun is going dark. However, if the sun goes dark, then all the known objects in the solar system, which are only visible because they reflect the sun's light, would also disappear from the sky. And this includes the moon and all the planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. These objects are only viewed from Earth because they reflect sunlight. If the sun has gone dark, there is no sunlight for them to reflect, so they would disappear from view. So when the sun goes dark and these objects do not disappear from sight, how come this is occurring? Well, we have to realize that the most difficult object to simulate is the sun. And these objects, the moon and these other objects, are easier to simulate because they're not as bright as the sun. So obviously, if you have devices that can simulate the sun, these devices can be used to simulate the moon and the other planets. It's actually easier because the simulators don't have to be turned up to full power. And then what we also need is the addition of a projection, in this case a different projection, because even the sun needs to have a projection together with the light source itself that is quite powerful. And this is so that anyone with a telescope and with a solar filter, when they turn their telescope towards the light source they see in the sky, and they look at it through the telescope, they see whatever sunspots they expect to see there. And so that, it needs to be a good simulation. It needs to therefore look like the sun would look if someone was looking at it through a telescope. And the same thing would then happen with the moon. You would just have, with a moon simulator, just have a different projection. In this case, the moon's surface features would be projected on whatever screen they use with these devices. Now, the evidence that the moon is being simulated is also overwhelming, because this is an image from a high-definition NASA video of the lunar eclipse on January 31st, 2018. And more details of it, I detail it in detail in Article 151 entitled "The Blood Red Moon Simulator at 30,000 feet." Here, I'm just going to mention the fact that the edge is stepped. We have straight lines and right angles in these steps, and it's regular. They are spaced at similar intervals above and below, showing that there's a reflection type of symmetry here, where whatever kind of edge they produced up here, they produced the same down here. So it's reflected at the equator. And the steps therefore go in the opposite direction. You also see some of the edge actually looks like it's the toothed edge of a gear wheel. And I have... This is from the left, actually the right hand side of the simulator. So it's from this section here. It's a close-up of that. And you can see what that edge looks like. We can see we have straight lines. We have right angles. We have regular spaced, toothed-like steps along this edge, like you would expect from a gear wheel. And we know that a gear wheel is, of course, a device. It's produced, it's an artificial device. It's used in artificial devices. This is what that edge looks like. We have straight lines, right angles, they spaced equally. And this is what you'd expect from a device, not from a natural object like the moon. So in conclusion, there is irrefutable evidence that artificial devices simulating the moon and the sun are operating on Earth. Evidence that solar system planets are being simulated is not yet available, but if the sun and the moon are being simulated, it is only logical that other planets, which are supposed to be visible from the Earth's surface, are as well. And those are the references. This is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching.